What if I told you that one of America's most iconic sports franchises, an organization synonymous with gridiron grit and Midwestern resilience, just walked straight into a trap of their own making, a strategic blunder so profound, so deeply miscalculated, that it ripped back the curtain on the entire cynical playbook of modern power. You see them every Sunday. You cheer their victories, lament their defeats. But behind the roar of the crowd, behind the polished press conferences and the carefully curated narratives, a different game is always being played. A game for your money. A game for control. And this time, they thought they had the winning hand. They were so sure. They stood before an obscure committee, one most people have never even heard of, armed with a statement they believe was a masterstroke, a document designed to manipulate, to persuade, to leverage every ounce of their brand power for a colossal payout. But what happened next? What unraveled in that hushed room, under the indifferent gaze of fluorescent lights, wasn't just a political misstep. It was a crisis that exposed the raw, unvarnished truth about how power really operates in this country. And trust me, by the time you finish this video, you will see it too. Let's set the stage. The Chicago Bears, a franchise steeped in tradition, but perpetually haunted by the specter of Soldier Field. Its age, its limitations, its inability to generate the kind of revenue modern sports behemoths demand. For years, the whispers had been growing louder. A new stadium, a futuristic cathedral of sport. But where? Chicago's politicians, bless their hearts, were playing hardball. They wanted guarantees, concessions, a fair shake for the city. And that, my friends, was a problem for the Bears. Because in the world of high-stakes corporate sports, fair shake often means less for us. Enter Hammond, Indiana, a city with a proud industrial past, a city hungry for revitalization, a city strategically positioned right across the border from Illinois. To the Bears brass, it was a golden opportunity. A chance to play one state against another, to extract maximum concessions. And the lure for Hammond? Jobs, prestige, a spotlight on their community. The ultimate economic development prize. But this wasn't just about a stadium. It was about leverage. It was about sending a clear, unequivocal message to Chicago: we will leave. And the vehicle for this message? The Hammond Stadium Bill. A piece of legislation quietly making its way through the Indiana State House, promising tax breaks, infrastructure investment, and land acquisition, all sweetened for the Bears. It was a meticulously crafted courtship designed to look like a genuine partnership. But underneath, it was a power play, pure and simple. And then there was the committee. Not the glitzy public hearings you see on cable news. No, this was the Indian Committee, a specialized legislative body within Indiana known for its deep dive into policy affecting historical land use, cultural heritage, and the complex relationship between the state and its diverse communities, including those of indigenous descent whose ancestral lands touch regions like Hammond. It held a unique, almost sacred authority on matters requiring a profound understanding of long-term impact beyond simple economics. This was not a committee to be trifled with, not with a simple jobs and growth pitch. Yet, the Bears thought they could. They thought they could walk in there, deliver a statement, and bend this committee to their will. This, my friends, was the first mistake. The day arrived. The air in the committee room was thick with expectation, though you wouldn't know it from the carefully composed faces of the Bears' representatives. They were there to deliver their statement. The document, sources close to the organization whispered, had been weeks in the making. Focus grouped, polished. Every word, every phrase, every nuanced pause, calibrated for maximum impact. It was not just a statement, it was a performance, a carefully choreographed ballet of corporate power and political persuasion. Let's break down what they said, and more importantly, what they didn't say. The statement began, predictably, with an ode to the economic renaissance the new stadium would usher in. Triads of prosperity, jobs, growth, and unparalleled community investment. They spoke of thousands of construction jobs, hundreds of permanent positions, a ripple effect that would transform Hammond. They painted a vivid picture of families thriving, businesses flourishing, a new era of civic pride. This isn't merely a stadium, the spokesperson intoned. It is a catalyst for an entire region, a beacon of opportunity. But notice the language. It was broad. It was aspirational. It was deliberately devoid of specifics. Where would these jobs come from? What kind of jobs? What were the guarantees that local residents, particularly those in underserved communities that the Indian Committee was acutely aware of, would actually benefit? These critical questions were swept under the rug of grand pronouncements. Then came the subtle threats. Not outright, of course, never outright, but veiled, artful. The window of opportunity, they warned, is narrow. Competition for such a monumental investment is fierce. Other states, other cities, are actively pursuing discussions. The implication was clear: approve this bill or risk losing out on this once-in-a-generation opportunity. It was the classic scarcity tactic, designed to induce a sense of urgency, to bypass critical scrutiny, to compel action based on fear of loss. Do you truly want to be the committee that stood in the way of progress? The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. They then shifted to a carefully constructed narrative of shared values. They spoke of the Bears' commitment to charity, to youth sports, to environmental stewardship. They even invoked the spirit of collaboration and community partnership, terms designed to resonate with the Indian Committee's known emphasis on holistic, respectful development. They promised robust community outreach programs, educational initiatives, and even vague commitments to respecting the historical fabric of the region. But again, the devil was in the details, or rather the lack thereof. What programs? Who would they partner with? How would they genuinely respect historic or cultural sites, especially given the history of development impacting indigenous lands? The statement offered platitudes instead of plans, promises instead of policies. It was a thin veneer of goodwill over a foundation of self-interest. And perhaps most chillingly, the statement attempted to frame any resistance as short-sighted, as standing against the tide of inevitable progress. This is a moment, they declared, where vision must overcome inertia, where bold action must replace hesitant deliberation. They were attempting to manufacture consent, not through reasoned argument, but through sheer rhetorical force, through the weight of their brand, through the unspoken expectation that institutions of their stature simply get what they want. They believed this statement was airtight. They believed it addressed every conceivable objection, parried every potential criticism, and greased the wheels of legislation with the oil of opportunity. They imagined the committee nodding in agreement, swayed by the sheer force of their presentation, eager to welcome the NFL at the Hammond. But then something happened, something they hadn't accounted for, something that sent a ripple of unease through their carefully constructed facade. The Unity Committee, you see, wasn't just any committee. Its members weren't swayed by the usual corporate bluster. They understood the long game. They understood the cost of progress when it ignored history, when it bulldozed community, when it paid lip service to partnership while operating with unchecked power. They had seen this playbook before. They had read these scripts, heard these promises, witnessed the fallout. And as the Bears representative concluded, a silence fell over the room. Not the silence of consent, but the silence of contemplation, of scrutiny, of a profound institutional skepticism that the Bears simply hadn't anticipated. The carefully crafted words, designed to be a sledgehammer, had instead become a boomerang, exposing the very calculations they were meant to hide. The committee members looked at the statement, then at each other, and you could almost hear the collective thought, "Is this all you've got?" What happened in that committee room wasn't an isolated incident. It was a single tactical episode that perfectly illuminated a historical pattern, a well-worn playbook that corporations, particularly sports franchises, have been running on the public for decades. It's a game of brinkmanship, of veiled threats and grandiose promises, all designed to funnel public money into private pockets. Think about it. How many times have we heard the same story? Professional sports team owners, often billionaires, pleading poverty, threatening to move their beloved franchise if taxpayers don't pony up for a shiny new stadium. They trot out the same tired lines: economic impact, civic pride, brand identity. They commission studies, often from their own consultants, that inflate projected benefits to astronomical, often absurd levels. They tell you that the new stadium will create thousands of jobs. But what kind? Often temporary construction jobs, or low-wage service sector jobs that don't uplift communities in the long term. They tell you it will boost local businesses. But often the stadium complex itself becomes a self-contained ecosystem, with corporate sponsors and national chains benefiting, while local mom-and-pop shops get squeezed out or see little to no spillover. They tell you it will attract tourism. But studies consistently show that stadium tourism largely displaces other forms of entertainment spending rather than creating new economic activity. People who would have spent money on other local attractions simply spend it at the stadium instead. And the cost? Oh, the cost. Billions in public subsidies. tax breaks that starve schools and infrastructure, direct funding that could otherwise go to healthcare, public safety, or genuine community development. You, the taxpayer, foot the bill for the construction, the infrastructure, the maintenance, often bearing the risk, while the team owners reap the vast majority of the profits from ticket sales, concessions, sponsorships, and merchandise. They privatize the gains and socialize the losses. It's a masterclass in corporate welfare, packaged as civic duty. And the Bears? They were following this playbook to the letter. They weren't inventing anything new. They were simply executing a strategy that had worked for countless other teams in countless other cities for generations. Threaten to leave. Find a desperate suitor. Present a carefully worded statement of grand intentions. Demand public funds. It's a cynical dance, choreographed for maximum extraction. They expected the Indian Committee to be just another audience, another hurdle to clear with the same well-rehearsed lines. They believed their institutional weight, their storied history, their sheer economic clout would be enough to steamroll any nuanced concerns. They expected to be met with deference, not dissection. They saw themselves as bringing a gift, not demanding a ransom. This pattern isn't limited to sports either. We see it in countless industries, massive corporations, lobbying for tax breaks, for deregulation, for public funding disguised as incentives. They leverage their scale, their influence, their ability to move capital and jobs, to dictate terms to local and state governments. They create a climate of fear of job loss, fear of economic stagnation, to compel politicians to act in their favor, even if it's against the long-term public interest. This is the game. This is the script. And for a long time it worked. For a very long time, most people bought it. They bought the illusion that these deals were good for everyone, that civic pride was somehow intrinsically linked to shelling out billions for billionaires. They bought the narrative because it was the only narrative they were given. But then something shifted, something profound. In that quiet committee room, the air began to crackle with an unexpected energy. The Bears' slick presentation, designed to be a bulldozer, hit an immovable object, the quiet, informed skepticism of the Indian Committee. The questions began, not the softball queries about seating capacity or projected timelines. No, these were surgical strikes. You speak of community engagement, a committee member began, her voice calm but penetrating. Can you outline, with specificity, your plans to involve the tribal nations whose ancestral lands encompass this region? What guarantees can you offer regarding the protection of archaeological sites? What genuine consultation has already taken place beyond the scope of this legislative process? A collective intake of breath. The Bears' representatives, accustomed to vague answers about future discussions and respectful partnerships, found themselves floundering. Their statement, so carefully designed to be broad and unchallengeable, now seemed hollow, inadequate, almost dismissive. You promise thousands of jobs? Another member pressed, leaning forward. For Hammond residents, but what percentage of your permanent high-wage positions will be genuinely accessible to long-term residents, particularly those in underserved communities? What workforce development programs are you funding specifically for these communities to ensure they can compete for these jobs? Are these jobs primarily for out-of-state contractors in your existing corporate infrastructure? The smiles on the Bears' faces began to falter. They had no detailed answers. They had platitudes. They had projections. They had no plan for genuine, equitable local impact beyond a few vague promises. Then came the really pointed questions. This bill proposes significant tax abatements and public financing, a third committee member stated, her gaze unwavering. Can you provide a transparent breakdown of the true cost to Indiana taxpayers, not just the projected revenue? And how does that public investment compare to the private capital your organization is willing to commit? What is the return on investment for the citizens of Indiana, beyond the intangible benefit of having an NFL team within their borders? This was it. This was the moment the script broke. The Bears statement, built on the premise of public generosity for private gain, was being dismantled piece by piece. The committee members weren't buying the illusion. They weren't accepting the narrative at face value. They were demanding specifics. They were demanding accountability. The team's representative stammered. They offered generalities. They pivoted back to the economic engine narrative. But it was too late. The carefully constructed facade had cracked. The public, watching the proceedings, now streamed live, impossible to ignore, was seeing it too. They saw the evasiveness. They saw the lack of concrete plans. They saw the sheer audacity of an organization asking for billions while offering so little intangible, guaranteed return to the actual communities it claimed to serve. This wasn't just a political defeat, it was a moral one. The Indian Committee, with its focus on deep, long-term community impact and historical sensitivity, had exposed the transactional, short-sighted nature of the Bears' pitch. They had called out the bluff. And in doing so, they triggered a cascading reversal. Media outlets, initially enthusiastic about the prospect of an NFL team, began to scrutinize the details more closely. Public opinion, initially swayed by the glamour, began to sour as the true costs and hollow promises became clear. The carefully orchestrated plan began to unravel. What we witnessed with the Bears' statement to the Indian Committee wasn't just a localized skirmish over a stadium. It was a microcosm of a much larger, fundamental struggle for control in our society, the struggle over belief. At its core, power isn't just about money, or force, or even laws. True, enduring power is about controlling the narrative. It's about shaping what people believe is true, what they believe is right, what they believe is inevitable. It's about manufacturing consent. For generations, institutions, governments, corporations, major media outlets have understood this. They've understood that if they can control the story, they can control the outcome. They can make you believe that a massive public subsidy for a private enterprise is economic development. They can make you believe that tax cuts for the wealthy will trickle down to everyone else. They can make you believe that a complex geopolitical issue has a simple binary solution. They do this through sophisticated public relations campaigns, through lobbying, through carefully curated statements like the one the Bears presented. They flood the information space with their preferred interpretation of events, often drowning out dissenting voices or more nuanced perspectives. They repeat key phrases until they become accepted truths. They leverage their platforms, their experts, their influence to paint a picture of reality that serves their interests. The Bears to Hammond narrative was a classic example. It was presented as an unalloyed good, a win-win, a no-brainer. Any questioning of it was framed as backward-looking, as standing in the way of progress, as anti-business. This is how powerful institutions maintain their grip. They don't just do things. They tell you why those things are necessary, beneficial, and morally correct. They create a kind of societal operating system in which certain ideas are preloaded as default settings. And challenging those defaults, that requires immense effort, courage, and a willingness to be labeled as an outlier. This system of manufactured consent has been incredibly effective. It allows the powerful to pursue their agendas with minimal resistance because the public has already been convinced that those agendas are aligned with the greater good, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. It fosters a passive acceptance of the status quo, where critical thinking is replaced by comfortable agreement. But here's the critical insight. This system, this control over belief, is not infallible. It relies on a certain level of public credulity. It relies on the assumption that people will accept the presented narrative without digging deeper, without asking uncomfortable questions, without seeking out alternative perspectives. And that, my friends, is where the cracks begin to show. The Indian Committee, with its focused, persistent questioning, didn't just challenge the Bears' proposal. It challenged the narrative itself. It challenged the idea that an NFL team moving to a new city is automatically a boon regardless of the terms. It challenged the assumption that corporations are always acting in the public interest. It challenged the very mechanism by which consent is manufactured, and in doing so it became a tiny bright flicker of resistance against a much larger insidious system. It demonstrated that power, no matter how entrenched, can be undermined when its narrative loses its grip on belief. And this brings us to the truly hopeful, truly democratic turn in this saga, because the skepticism that began in that committee room didn't stay there. It metastasized. It spread. It ignited a broader public awakening. They've stopped buying the illusion. They've stopped buying the carefully crafted press releases. They've stopped buying the promises of trickle-down prosperity that never quite reaches their neighborhoods. The public, once a passive recipient of manufactured consent, is becoming increasingly adept at recognizing the playbook. Social media, for all its flaws, has become a powerful tool for collective scrutiny. Citizens armed with information and a healthy dose of cynicism born from years of disillusionment are starting to ask the same pointed questions the Indian Committee asked. Show us the numbers they demand. Prove the benefits they insist. Where is our return on investment? They collectively inquire. This isn't just about a stadium deal. This is a fundamental shift in the relationship between institutions and the people they claim to serve. The old deference is gone. The automatic trust has eroded. And that, my friends, is a good thing. A truly healthy democracy thrives on skepticism, not blind faith. It thrives on an engaged citizenry willing to challenge power, to question narratives, to demand accountability. When people become skeptical, when they learn to dissect statements like the bears and see the hidden agendas, the veiled threats, the self-serving pronouncements, that's when the power dynamic begins to shift. That's when the manufacturing of consent becomes exponentially harder. That's when the illusion shatters. The public, galvanized by the committee's courage and clarity, began to demand transparency. They flooded local representatives with calls and emails. They organized online. They became a corrective force, reminding their elected officials that they are accountable not to powerful corporations, but to the people. This isn't just a political movement, it's a cultural one. It's a collective reassertion of agency. It's the public recognizing that they are the ultimate arbiters of what constitutes the greater good, not a handful of billionaires and their well-paid lobbyists. It's a slow, arduous, but utterly vital process of taking back control of the narrative and thus taking back control of their own destiny. This democratic turn is messy. It's often loud. It makes powerful people uncomfortable, but it is absolutely essential, because when the people stop believing the stories they are told, when they start asking why and who benefits, that's when real change becomes possible. That's when the foundations of unchecked power begin to tremble. So, what does the Bears' fateful statement to the Indian Committee ultimately tell us? It tells us that even the most powerful institutions, armed with the most sophisticated PR and political strategies, can be undone by simple, persistent truth-seeking. It tells us that the old ways of manufacturing consent are becoming less effective, precisely because you are becoming more discerning. This wasn't just a misstep by a football team. It was a canary in the coal mine, signaling a broader realignment in how power is exercised and how it is challenged in our modern world. It showed that the public, once a passive audience, is now an active participant, a vigilant gatekeeper against overreach and manipulation. The fight for truth, for transparency, for genuine accountability, it's an ongoing one. It requires constant vigilance. It requires a commitment to looking beyond the headlines, beyond the official statements, beyond the carefully curated narratives, and asking what's really going on here. What truly benefits, and what are we, the public, being asked to sacrifice? Stay curious, stay skeptical. Don't let anyone tell you what to believe without presenting irrefutable evidence. And remember, your voice, when joined with others, has the power to unravel even the most entrenched plans. If you found this breakdown insightful, if it sparked a new way of looking at power and politics, then you know what to do. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel and join our community of truth seekers, because the conversation doesn't end here. It only just begins. Let me know in the comments below, what other instances have you seen where powerful institutions tried to control the narrative, only for it to backfire? What are your thoughts on the role of public skepticism in a healthy democracy? Your insights are vital, and together we can continue to peel back the layers of deception. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never stop asking questions. Until next time.